Hey Stu, welcome to the Nelson Pod.
Thank you very much for having me. Looking forward to talking.
It's great to have you here. You're a man with a very interesting story. Nelson's full of people with interesting stories, and you're one of the more interesting ones we've come across in recent times. Originally from Scotland.
Correct, yeah.
And you've had a career in the military, quite an amazing career in the military. And you had your main sort of time in the army, but you didn't start in the army.
I did not. So being brought up in Scotland, my father was in the Royal Air Force Reserve. My grandfather was a navigator during World War II. So light blue flowed through my family. So the obvious shift was I joined the Royal Air Force. And it was a great 5 years. But it was identified fairly early on that maybe I had slightly more energy than was required.
Uh-huh.
And I got into not massive amounts of trouble, but a little bit of trouble. And I was beginning to think this isn't for me. And the Royal Air Force were beginning to think,
now,
fortunately.
What sort of trouble are we talking about?
Look, I joined up when I was 18 years old. It was just sort of, a little bit too much drinking, a little bit too much mucking around. Just general silliness, but just not really what the Royal Air Force were looking for in an officer.
Okay.
So I was down doing a course as I was beginning to think about what's next, and the intelligence corps of the British Army, a chap poked his head out the third-story window and shouted, "Come and see me," along those lines, and they offered to transfer my commission from the Royal Air Force into the British Army. First one in history to actually do, officer in history to actually transfer between the two.
Right.
And at that point, my career took off.
Doing what?
Right through my career, I was involved in intelligence. So, the gathering, the analysis of information. And really, in the Royal Air Force, it was at a very strategic level. As I transferred across the British Army, it got more operational, and I got involved in something called human intelligence, which really, in simple terms, is what we would call spying.
Right. So you were a spy?
I was, yes.
Tell us more about that.
It's not as exciting as it sounds.
Okay.
Now, there are really, really exciting bits. But if you think about a James Bond film or a Jason Bourne film, and it's just all action from beginning to end, the important bit of working in espionage and working in the intelligence world is the analysis, the writing of reports, and answering the questions. So, an awful lot of time is actually spent doing that analysis. And, I had reports that would land on prime ministers' desks. I spoke in the US Senate about the aftermath of Gulf War II. So, there's an awful lot of that side of stuff. But there is the good, fun, cool stuff. But I didn't ever drive an Aston Martin. Well, I did, but not on operations.
Okay. So you're in the army. You're in your 20s now. Mm-hmm. And where does it take you?
All over the world. So if we look at war zones throughout the Balkans, throughout Iraq on numerous occasions, throughout Afghanistan on numerous occasions, but also with my family, Liz and the kids, we travelled everywhere together, and I served right across the UK, Northern Ireland. We served in Germany a couple of times, and I was on exchange. I ran the Canadian Human Programme for 3 years as they were trying to develop that capability.
Right. So when you're going to places like the Balkans and Afghanistan, you're there as a spy, or were you there? Right. And so how does that work? How does a spy fit into that operation?
It really depends on the sort of operation it is. In the Balkans, everything was done in uniform, and that worked because of the sort of environment that it was. When we moved to Iraq, dependent on the security situation, you could actually run an awful lot of operations from the security of your operating base, your forward operating base, where people would come and see you, and you'd make sure that their safety was protected when they came to visit you. But then there are other occasions where you actually get out on the ground. Now, not that you can see it, but in Afghanistan, one of the major tribes, the Hazaras, are very well respected because they have blue eyes and they have red beards. So when I grow a beard, it comes out red. So when I was jumping in and out of Afghanistan, for the weeks beforehand, I would be given permission not to shave. I would grow my beard, have my blue eyes, and my hair would be covered up. I'd have the bit more of a suntan, look a little bit grubby, and I could get away with it.
Wow,
just enough.
Yeah.
Get away with it, and I knew enough of the language that I always had an interpreter with me, that I could tell if my interpreter was asking the questions the way I wanted them asked, and you go in, you do it, and then you return safely. So it really depends on the sort of operation. We all thought that Iraq and Afghanistan would be really challenging because, well, look. But you find your way through it, and I mean that really comes down to what is it that makes someone successful in that sort of world. The ability to actually just solve problems on the fly.
And that's what you're doing. You're in those areas trying to figure out how to solve problems.
Yep.
Right. Did you get into any hairy situations? Did anyone shoot at you? Did anything like that happen?
Yes. You do get shot at. And only once did the bullet connect.
Okay.
And that was all my fault. I actually put my hand up to say ceasefire, and I was just a little bit late. Get my hand back down again. So my arm. But you do get shot at, but you learn very, very quickly what the sound of a bullet sounds like, because it's very, very different. If someone is shooting right at you, it sounds a certain way. If someone's shooting in your general direction, it sounds different. So you learn very, very quickly that this is the sort of environment we're in. I mean, there was one occasion I was actually on the phone to Liz. You got a sort of 20-minute phone call a week when communications were up, and I was on the phone to Liz one day, and the mortar started raining down, and Liz is hearing this from Germany, down the phone, and are you going to have to go? Yeah, I'm going to have to go right now. So there's those situations, but fortunately they are few and far between, because my role is not to be in those places, and actually the vast majority of our training is about being in the right place, not the wrong place, and having the situational awareness of what's right and what's wrong, and get a feel for what's happening. But it's also so much time is spent about how to disengage. So it's all about getting away. If ever we had to open fire, it was in self-defense. We didn't go out to make the noise, but we were prepared to make lots of it in order to extract ourselves.
Right. Any other hairy experiences?
Well, there was the time that I was in a C-130 Hercules overhead Baghdad when a surface-to-air missile was launched at it, and we went from cruising speed onto the ground inside what felt like, probably slightly longer, it felt like 30 seconds. The pilot just dropped the aircraft. I mean, that was probably one of the hairier ones, but more because I had no control. We're control freaks. So, I had no control over there. Right? And the back gate, the back was open so we could see what was going on. But, that's one of the more hairy ones. But as I say, more hairy because I wasn't responsible for getting out of it. I mean, I've driven into minefields before and realised that you've got to get out of that minefield.
You didn't know it was a minefield?
No, I'm not that insane.
How did you find out?
When we drove in, someone, in fact, it was my interpreter, looked at the ground and went, "Is that?" And I went, "Right, stop."
And where were you?
That was in the hinterland in Bosnia. So just up near the village of Srebrenica, where the war crimes were committed.
Speaking of crimes, I mean, what about the morality of war and I guess, the challenges that you must have come up against in your career? I think, and this is obviously not from, I don't come from a military background at all, but as an observer, it seems to me that there are conflicts that are justified and there are conflicts that are not. Do you ever sort of have to sort of wrestle with those things in your own mind?
I remember a lawyer once said to me, and certainly when you get engaged in the more higher end of covert activity, you will have a legal advisor who, if you've got one that doesn't have much experience, they'll tell you what you can and can't do. And the one that I was working with was awesome, because I could ask the question, how do I go and do this? And he would come back and say, well, this is what you can and can't do. Because much as, when we look at, and unfortunately most of our experiences of war fighting is what we see in films. But war has ethics of its own. The Geneva Conventions, which have been rewritten 4 times, stipulate what we can and cannot do in combat. Every soldier, when they deploy, have something called a yellow card. And that yellow card has the rules of engagement that says, this is what you're allowed to do, this is what you're not allowed to do. And I gave an example of, we weren't allowed to open fire unless it was in self-defense. That's an example of rules of engagement. So, the ethics of warfare have been declared since the 1700s in Europe, when they went, actually, this is a bit bad, we shouldn't really be killing each other. And most soldiers agree with that. There are very, very few who, very few, and they certainly don't get into the upper echelons of specialist warfare if they don't understand the ethics of it. So, it sounds counterintuitive, but going to war is very, very highly policed by the lawyers before you go anywhere. That was the reason that it was such a challenge in March 2003, when Tony Blair and George Bush were going, do we, don't we, don't we, do we? That was all legal arguments as to why.
Actually, Iraq, the second war, is one I was thinking of, in that there's a fantastic podcast actually called The Rest is Politics, where Alistair Campbell, who was Blair's head of communications, is one of the hosts, and the other host is a guy named Rory Stewart, who I know them both. Yeah. So Rory Stewart was the Conservative Party's Minister of Justice, and he said, if Boris Johnson becomes leader of the party, I'm off. Boris got the job, he left. And the two of them talk about a lot of things. And I think on the 30th anniversary of the Iraq War, they had a series of pretty intense conversations about that part of history and Alistair Campbell's role in it.
Yep.
And the message that came through from that, very clearly, according to Rory Stewart, is that the right strategy with Iraq and Saddam after 9/11 would have been containment rather than invasion. Do you ever think about these things?
So, 20th anniversary of the Iraq War. It all kicked off on the night of the 19th of March, because there was intelligence that said that Saddam Hussein and his family were going out to a restaurant, and that was the beginning of shock and awe. In the months before that, I had been involved in building the intelligence picture that led to the dossier, the 45-minute dossier that said we're all going to die in 45 minutes if we don't deal with this because of weapons of mass destruction. That was the spin that was put on the intelligence. I think we all agree now that the
wrong.
narrative for going to war was incorrect. I'm not saying that going to war was incorrect.
Well, when you
the narrative for going to war was incorrect, because there weren't. We now know there weren't weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah, so it was wrong. In plain language, the claim that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction was wrong.
That he had weapons of mass destruction that could be deployed in such a short time frame was incorrect.
Yeah.
I can go that far.
Yeah.
If the narrative had been, and I use the word narrative, if the reason for going to war had been to remove Saddam Hussein and his regime, that's a different story. But that wasn't the one we went to war for. And actually, that was why Claire Short turned around. And Claire Short was responsible for Phase 4, which was the rebuild of Iraq afterwards. Like, the most important bit of going to war is helping the country re-establish itself afterwards. Claire Short turned around and went, not playing, at the same time as Robin Cook went, not playing. And, well, how do we rebuild it? And that's then why a political problem was basically chucked over the fence to the military to go solve that. And the way the military solved it, as we saw, was that we did the same thing again and again every 6 months. Every 6 months, the same thing, until there was a realization after about 5 years of, wait a minute, we need the strategy. And that's when we started seeing the strategy of the rebuild kicking into place. But back to your point, the decision to go to war was based on inaccuracies.
So, when you reflect on your career, there are times when you think, yep, that was a good war I was involved in, that one not so much? I
think, back to my lawyer, back to the point about the lawyer, he said to me in the very, very early stages of training, specialist training, if you make an operationally sound decision, it's very unlikely to be illegal. And that stood with me, even in business. I still use that to talk about the ethics of business. I can hand on heart say that I had an absolutely awesome military career. I worked with some amazing people from right across the coalition forces that we were involved in, and alongside the countries that I visited, that I was deployed to. And I can hand on heart say that I had a great career, and I know, I have been in court in London talking about some of the stuff that I was involved in, where people have said, I can hand on heart say that I had a great military career. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and everything I did whenever I was deployed was well within the margins of the Geneva Convention.
And that's all you need
for me.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, that's being a professional soldier, I guess.
I can look at it and say, everything that we've just discussed. I will still sit there and go, I went and did what I was told to do, and I did it with the highest of standards, with ethics, and we looked after the people that we were there to protect.
So I like to consider myself a pacifist, but I think the reality is that's a very hard thing for human beings, and I certainly believe in the right of self-defense, the right to self-defense. And I look at Ukraine, and to me that feels very much like a justifiable war. You've got an atrocity taking place, you've got an invasion, and it feels to me completely right that the Russian forces are being met with aggression. What do you think is going to happen in Ukraine?
So in Ukraine, we've got the counteroffensive that's going on at the moment. The ground is drying out, therefore there's room for manoeuvre warfare. But unfortunately, both sides have got stagnated. It's almost like the First World War is a war of attrition now rather than manoeuvre warfare. Either the Ukrainians are going to do spectacularly well in this counteroffensive, but as Russians, as opposed to Russia, the people of Russia continue to see young men going off to war, and it is predominantly young men going off to war. Once all the prisons are empty and they've then got to go back into the villages again and take more young men and older men, there will be that creep towards standing up to Moscow. And I'm being very clear I'm trying to be clear in my language here. That will result in something having to happen to Putin, whether he is removed or however that happens. At which point Russia will sue for peace.
What about the argument that if Putin goes, you'll get someone who's even more hardline in there, and things will get worse?
Potentially, I do feel that we need to be a little bit careful that we do our research beyond just what the news is telling us. But that is a possibility. Of course it is. And one of so much study has gone into Putin, who I'm smiling because it's a story I tell in my workshops about how Putin became Putin. If we get someone that hasn't been studied as well, do we know how they're going to respond? So there really is a careful balance at that political strategic level to make sure that we've got things in place that we can look after and start to rebuild the country. But I think, even President Biden has made some wise comments just in the last few days about NATO are not going to make it easy for Ukraine to join. You've got the standard of, well, if you want to be a NATO country, this is what it looks like. Yeah. So, there is a lot of negotiation to go on before we get to a place of lasting peace.
Right. How long do you think it will take?
Depending on this counteroffensive, we've got the summer. Before it starts raining again, the ground gets soft, and then the ground gets hard again in winter. And you almost see that cycle. It could just keep going until Western economies stop delivering armaments to into Ukraine. Or it could be over very, very, very quickly if something happens to the leadership of either country.
Do you think the fate of Ukraine could actually be sealed by the US presidential election?
That was exactly where I was just about to go.
Yeah.
Yes. It could, and I think whatever we think of the United States, it is the superpower. Dependent on the outcome of the election, that will determine potentially the support that Ukraine gets. That's not to say that if the US says we're not supporting anymore, that the other countries in Europe do support, because it was actually Germany that started with the major support before the US began to get involved.
So how many years in the military?
23.
And what did you come out of it, do you think, with in terms of stuff that changed you?
A really timely question, because I think it's taken me 10 years to figure it out, and it's 10 years since I took my uniform off for the last time. I joined as a boy, and I spent a long time after leaving going, what would life be like if you hadn't had all of that? What are my values? Because when you join the Royal Air Force, when you join the British Army, you're given the values. And it's right, okay, this is what we do. Selfless commitment, courage, all that stuff. That's the standard. And that is the standard. And during training, we're going to take you from whatever background you come from, and by the end of the first term, whether that's however many weeks that is, you're going to be so tired, and you're going to be so fit, and you're going to be so hungry that actually we're going to shape you into people that grow up with these values. And those values then sit with you. And this is one of the challenges that I see with businesses now. But your values are in your subconscious. They're part of you. And that was why it was such a challenge when I then left. I went, well, so what's a civvy? Right. What do civilians do? And it's really taken me time to establish what my values are. And then you use all of the tools that I gained during my military career to help me figure out what life looks like now, but then also go out and help other businesses to realize that, if you have a values-based organization where you truly live those values, you're going to be successful. We know that because that's what the military does. Strategy, this is what it looks like. What's the difference between tactics, operations, and strategy? And how do we make that work in our lives? But the thing that I've taken away most from my military career is, and it goes all the way back to the motto of the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst, it is serve to lead. In order to lead, and we all lead in lives, and in the military, even the most junior soldier to the most senior general are leaders, and leadership is about service. And if we could all recognize that leadership is about service, and the greatest act of service is love, leadership becomes simple for everyone.
Right, I like that. When you look at the political landscape in Aotearoa, New Zealand today, what do you make of the leadership?
I wrote about it in stuff on Anzac Day. I think whatever your organisation is, whether it's a country or whether it's your business, your family, leadership flows from the highest level. As a dad, as a mum, as a parent, as a carer, our children look to us and say, all right, so that's the way I'm meant to lead my life. When we look at New Zealand at the moment, we look at politics in New Zealand, we're really struggling, aren't we? And I'm not saying, I truly believe that politicians become politicians because they believe they can do good. But then it just gets messy, and they get busy, and they make mistakes, and that's what that's what we're seeing in. It's the Labour government that are getting it at the moment, or the party that are getting it at the moment. But you see people who are too busy, and they're trapped in the echo chamber of social media timelines.
Are we talking about politicians or the public?
I'm talking about politicians. Yeah. What we see as the public are people that can't keep up because they're still being trained the way that. Well, politicians are trained to answer the media, but then left of centre, you just go, I need you to answer that question. I didn't even know that was a question until you asked it, but I'm going to give you an answer because you need a soundbite. We first saw this media turnover really when it was Ben Brown, the BBC journalist, deployed with the divisional headquarters into Kosovo. And he'd be hanging around the tent of the general at 5:30 every evening. And the general would walk out at 6:15 and tell Ben his story. And they got really tense because Ben had just missed the 6 o'clock news.
Right.
But no one had told the general that there was a news at 6 o'clock, and because that wasn't his timeline. And that was really the modern era of the media being so close to what's going on that they're actually inside the timeline, inviting people in, and therefore mistakes happen. And if I'm being kind, I believe that's actually what we're seeing at the moment, and people are being caught out. Because they're not being given the chance to sort it out.
So have you ever heard of a guy named Daniel McLaughlin?
No.
So he's a New Zealand writer and thinker who I think's really pretty onto it. He wrote a piece in The Listener recently, and he said that basically over the last 20 years, a lot of things haven't got better in New Zealand. And he says his thesis is that it hasn't been because of ideology, it's probably been because of a lack of ideology, and that you've got these main parties trying to get in the centre, trying to keep everyone happy, and not really standing for anything. And I think that is a very uninspiring thing when it comes to leadership. Have you made any similar observations?
I have actually. I was in the lounge in Los Angeles in November, and David Shearer sat down opposite me, ex-Labour leader. And we got talking about stuff, about sailing and about the Sudan, because he's done a lot of work over there. And after we'd had a couple of glasses of something, I said, "Tell me, why did you get out? You're the party, and then the opportunity for South Sudan came along. Why did you leap?" And he said, "Well, I leapt because I was about to get pushed."
Right.
I was about to get pushed because, I hope this is public knowledge.
The David Cunliffe crowd.
The party wanted to go far more left, but David Shearer said, I recognise that to win elections, you've got to be centrist. Whether you're a little bit left or a little bit right, you've got to be centrist in order to capture as many votes. And we see that if you look at the US and you look at the UK. We're seeing those people breaking out, going, well, I'm going to be more extreme. I'm going to be more extreme on that side. But then we sit here in the middle. Most of the population, you've got in the US, you've got, I think it's 6% are right-wing fundamentalist, 8% are left-wing fundamentalist. All the rest of us are sitting in the middle, going, I don't want to say anything because I don't want to be one of them or one of them. And I believe that's exactly the same thing as we're seeing in New Zealand. That's if you look at what happened on the Parliament lawn, all of those people a lot of those people on the Parliament lawn, you had left and right wing fundamentalists. Nothing wrong with fundamentalism; it's the activity that it breeds sometimes. But they were sharing tents. It was, and we're all sitting there going, "Oh, I don't." And I believe that's the stagnation that we're seeing. And again, if it comes back to your leadership question of the country, well, if that's what we're seeing as leadership in the top of the country, well, we've got to do something, and that's where grassroots is important. We see big changes happen because grassroots make it happen. I was talking to, in fact, sitting right here, I was talking to the chief exec of KidsCan about how they ran a program about getting women's health products into colleges for girls. And that turned into a national policy. But it was because it started at the grassroots, and I believe that's how we begin to change this country back.
I agree with you, and I think if our leaders aren't going to lead, it's up to community groups. It's about people who have got a passion and a vision to make things better. It's up to them, because I think if people aren't prepared to lead, they're still going to want to be seen to be supporting stuff. So I think there is an opportunity there. Hey, so Nelson, how long have you been here?
Just 18 months.
So far, so good?
Loving it.
Yep.
Oh, it's great. I mean, I flew back in from Wellington yesterday, and you just coming into land, you see the mountains, the oceans, the beach. It's just awesome.
Yeah.
Loving it.
Yeah. And how did you end up here?
It was my wife's fault, in a really nice way.
Yeah.
We walked the Abel Tasman probably about 2 years ago, and she was, "This is quite nice." I mean, yeah, it's all right. No, but this is quite nice. And we were then meant to be going on holiday and couldn't. So Liz said, "Shall we go to Nelson for the weekend?" And I was, "Yeah, okay." At which point she presented me with 12 houses that we might like to go and look at while we were there. We didn't like any of them. But there was a property that wasn't on the market that we had a look at. We made an offer there and then, and had to go home and sell our place in the Wairarapa.
Right.
And we moved Waitangi Day last year.
Yeah. And do you find like the Wairarapa is a very popular place, offers many of the same sort of lifestyle qualities that Nelson Whakatū does, but why do you think Nelson's better?
There's more than one road in and out. And that really was. I mean, we loved visiting the Wairarapa before we moved there.
Yeah.
But if we want to go to the beach, well, it's an hour and a half away. If you want to go to Wellington, it's an hour and a half away. Whereas, Nelson Tasman, I run down the beach most mornings. It's 10 minutes from the house.
Yeah.
We can be paddleboarding in Kaiteriterri 45 minutes later. We can be over the hill in Takaka. I can be whitewater kayaking down the Buller in 90 minutes. There's so much more here. And I mean, one of the things that we've found is, because you've got to fly, you can fly anywhere. As I said to you, from leaving our house, we can be on Santa Monica Pier in 15 hours.
Right. Yeah.
And there's just
if that's where you want to go.
If that's where you want to go, you've got access to so much here, but you've also got access to so much by just spreading your wings a little bit.
And now you're running a business called Unstoppable Force.
I am, yes.
And how does that work?
Unstoppable Force, it really comes back to everything we've spoken about. Unstoppable Force believes that we should all be more unreasonable. It believes that we all need to raise our standards. It believes that we must determine what our sacrifice is in order to live the life that we are given, the unique life that we are gifted to be unstoppable.
And when you say it believes, that means you believe?
It's me. It's my chief of staff.
Is that
my
you?
wife.
Okay.
No. So Liz is ex-British Army as well. She's a nurse and midwife. She's now a qualified health and wellness coach, because Unstoppable Force isn't about just always going hard at it. Unstoppable Force is about creating a sustained momentum. And you can only have a sustained momentum if we look after this earthly suit that we're given. And so Liz, basically the chief of staff, I didn't want to call her my PA. She does all the stuff that I don't really, but she also does the health and wellness side of coaching with our clients.
Right, cool. And so how do we, in a nutshell, all become more unstoppable forces?
Just really, to start with, remember that you are unique. We've come to, and we've spoken about this a lot in this chat, that we spend our lives trying to fit in. Society needs us to fit in, to conform. But we're unique. We've forgotten to be unique. So for every single person who listens to this, here's the one thing that you can do right now to become a little bit more unstoppable. Remember your dream. Because every single dream that we have out there is unique. And then take one step towards that dream. That's being unreasonable. That's raising your standard. That is allowing you to determine a sacrifice that you will make to achieve that dream. that's becoming unstoppable.
And is running your own business and living in Nelson, was that your dream?
No. Running my own business, yes. My dream is to positively impact 10 million lives in 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that means it doesn't matter where I live.
Yep. How do you measure that?
Well, at the moment, we've probably filled an A320. But yeah, I mean, I look at the number of people who listen to the podcast, the number of people who've read my first book, the number of people who are signing up for the second book, the number of people who are in our workshops. That's how you begin to measure it. But I think one of the great things, and Simon Sinek talks about this in one of his books, by having a dream, having a goal that is so big, 10 million in 10 years, means it's almost outside of my scope. And that means I need other people to help me do it. You are helping me do that.
Good. Hey, well, look, really nice to talk to you, Stu. Very interesting conversation. Covered a lot of ground. And you do your own podcast as well.
Yes.
How do people find out about that?
So, Unstoppable Force TV is available on YouTube, and you can grab that by heading to my website, unstoppableforce.co.nz, and you get access to to all of the artifacts that we're building in that space to help everyone become unstoppable.
Nice, Stu. Have an unstoppable weekend. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thoroughly enjoyed the conversation.